Picture a small room in Rome, sometime in the late 50s AD. A man is dictating a letter, most likely to a scribe named Tertius, whose name we only know because he snuck a personal greeting into the very letter he was writing down. The man dictating has never been to the church he's writing to. In a few months, he's heading toward Jerusalem, where he already suspects arrest is waiting for him. From there, it's a slow, chained journey through trials and shipwreck, all the way to Rome. The same city he's writing to right now, except next time he arrives, it will be as a prisoner. And in the middle of this letter, almost in passing, he drops a single sentence that will end up printed on more coffee mugs and stitched onto more pillows than almost any other line in the entire New Testament. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Most of the time, that sentence gets used in a way that isn't actually what it says. Most people know this verse as a comfort verse. Fewer people realize it's actually a key to understanding how God works throughout the entire Bible, not a key to your specific situation making sense next week. A key to the entire architecture of Scripture, from the first page of Genesis to the last page of Revelation. Once you see the pattern this verse describes, you'll start noticing it in nearly every major story the Bible tells. And by the end of this video, I think you'll read the whole Bible differently. But before we go anywhere, I need to clear something up, because this verse has been badly misused for a long time. Romans 8:28 does not say everything that happens is good. It doesn't say tragedy is secretly fine, or that your grief is somehow misplaced, or that if you just had enough faith, the pain would make sense right now. Read it again carefully. God works all things together for good. Not all things are good. There's a difference between a builder using broken material and calling the wreckage itself beautiful. Paul isn't telling suffering people to smile through it. He's making a claim about who God is in the middle of things that are genuinely, unambiguously bad. If that distinction gets lost, this verse turns into a weapon people use to rush past real pain instead of a promise that meets people inside it. The original Greek makes this even clearer than most English translations do. The word behind works is synerge, the same root we get synergy from. It doesn't mean God causes each individual thing to happen. It means God works alongside, works together with, weaves multiple threads into something. And the word behind good is agathon, not kalon. Greek actually has two different words that both get translated good in English. Kalon means good in the sense of beautiful, pleasant, immediately attractive. Agathon means good in the sense of beneficial, of serving a purpose, of moving toward what's genuinely best, even when it doesn't feel kalon at all in the moment. Paul didn't say God works all things together into something pleasant. He said God works all things together towards something that actually serves your good, whether or not it feels pleasant on the day you're living through it. There's a second phrase in this verse that gets skipped over almost every time it's quoted, called according to his purpose. The Greek word for called is kletoi, not an invitation you might decline, but a summons already answered, describing people already inside the relationship Paul's talking about. And purpose is prothesis, a word that literally means something set out ahead of time, a plan laid down in advance rather than improvised on the spot. Put the two together and the verse stops sounding like a general life philosophy available to everyone regardless of what they believe, and starts sounding much more specific. This promise describes what happens inside a relationship with God that already exists, not a law of nature that guarantees comfort to anyone going through hard things. That distinction matters because it means Romans 8:28 was never meant to be quoted at a stranger's tragedy as a tidy explanation. It was written to people already walking with God as a description of how He works with those He's already called. With that in place, let's go back to the beginning, because this pattern doesn't start with Paul. Paul is naming something that was already running through the entire story. You actually don't have to wait for Joseph to find the first trace of this. It's there in Genesis 3, in the same chapter where everything goes wrong. Adam and Eve disobey, the world breaks, and in the middle of pronouncing the consequences, God says something to the serpent that theologians have been calling the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. ever since that the offspring of the woman would one day crush the serpent's head, even though the serpent would wound his heel first. Genesis 3:15. Read that sentence closely, and it's already doing exactly what Romans 8:28 describes. The worst thing that had ever happened, humanity's first rebellion against God, the entrance of death and suffering into the world, becomes, in the very same breath, the moment God announces a rescue plan that will eventually cost him everything and save everyone. The wound comes first, the crushing victory comes after. That's not a coincidence buried in Genesis 3. That's the blueprint for every single story that follows it, all the way to the resurrection. Joseph's brothers hated him. They sold him into slavery as a teenager. He was falsely accused, imprisoned for years for a crime he didn't commit, forgotten by people he'd helped. If you stopped the story at almost any point in the middle, it would read as a tragedy with no redemption in sight. A good young man, destroyed by the people closest to him for no reason he could see. Genesis 50:20 records what Joseph says to those same brothers decades later, once he's second in command of Egypt and holding their lives in his hands. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Notice what Joseph does not say. He doesn't say what his brothers did wasn't real evil. He doesn't minimize the years in prison or the betrayal. He holds both true at once. What they did was genuinely wrong, and God was working underneath it toward something Joseph couldn't have seen from inside the pit. That sentence, centuries before Paul ever wrote a word, is Romans 8:28 in miniature. If Joseph shows this pattern playing out over years, Job forces us to sit inside it without any resolution for a very long time. Job loses his children, his wealth, his health, all in a matter of days, and Scripture gives us no tidy explanation handed to Job himself. He never gets to see the conversation that opened the book. He just loses everything and has to keep living inside a question with no answer. Here's what's important about Job, and it's a corrective to how this verse sometimes gets used. God never tells Job why. Job's comfort, when it finally comes at the end of the book, isn't an explanation. It's an encounter with God himself. For 37 chapters, Job and his friends argue about why this happened, and every single explanation offered is wrong. Then God finally speaks out of a whirlwind in chapters 38 through 41, and he doesn't answer a single one of Job's questions. He asks Job almost 70 questions instead, starting with, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" It's not an evasion, it's a different kind of answer entirely. Not information, but presence, and a reminder of scale. If you're in a season right now where nothing makes sense, and you feel like you deserve an explanation you're not getting, Job is in Scripture on purpose. Sometimes the good Romans 8:28 promises isn't a satisfying answer. Sometimes it's simply God, present, in the middle of the unexplained. If Joseph and Job are two demonstrations of the same pattern, the cross is where the pattern gets pushed as far as it can possibly go, because there is no worse evil in the Bible than the murder of an innocent man who happened to be God himself. Acts 2:23 puts both truths in the same sentence without softening either one. Jesus was handed over by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, meaning the people responsible, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. Both true. It was a real, horrific injustice, carried out by real people making real choices they were responsible for. And it was also somehow inside God's redemptive plan the entire time. This is the moment that proves Romans 8:28 isn't wishful thinking. If God can take the single worst act of injustice in human history, the execution of his own innocent son, and make it the exact mechanism through which the whole world is offered salvation, then the pattern running through Job, isn't a coincidence. It's how God has always worked. The cross is Romans 8:28 written across the sky, and it doesn't stop at the cross. Friday looked to everyone standing there like the complete and final defeat of everything Jesus' followers had hoped for. Not a metaphorical low point, an actual ending. The women who went to the tomb on Sunday morning weren't going to witness a resurrection. They were going to finish a burial, because as far as they knew, the story was already over. That's the part worth sitting with. Even the people closest to Jesus, who'd heard him predict this multiple times, had no working framework for what was about to happen. The good was already in motion, and the people it was happening for still couldn't see it yet. Here's what I want you to see now that we've walked through it. Genesis to Revelation isn't a random collection of unrelated stories. From the very first pages, it's one long demonstration of a single claim. God does not waste what's broken. Not because brokenness is secretly fine, but because God specializes in redeeming exactly the things that look unredeemable from where you're standing in the middle of them. It's worth knowing who Paul was actually writing to when he said this, because it changes how the sentence lands. The church in Rome, in the years right around this letter, was a small, mostly poor, socially precarious community, meeting in homes made up of a mix of Jewish and Gentile believers who didn't always get along with each other in the capital of the empire that would soon start actively persecuting them. Within about a decade of this letter arriving, the Emperor Nero would blame Christians for the Great Fire of Rome and respond with public executions designed as spectacle. Some believers thrown to wild animals in the arena, some, according to later historians, used as human torches to light his gardens at night. Paul didn't know the specifics of what was coming when he wrote this, but he knew the general shape of it. He'd already been beaten, stoned, shipwrecked, and imprisoned multiple times by this point in his ministry. When he told this specific church that God works all things together for good, he wasn't handing them a bumper sticker. He was handing them something he expected them to need. Once you know this thread is there, you can't unsee it. The exile, the resurrection itself, the ultimate reversal, death becoming the doorway to life instead of the end of it. It's the same shape, told over and over at every scale across roughly 1,500 years of writing. Once you notice this pattern, you'll start seeing other biblical writers describing the exact same thing in their own words to people going through real, immediate suffering. Pastoral care, not theory. Peter, writing to churches being actively persecuted across the Roman Empire, says their faith is being refined like gold, tested by fire, genuinely painful and genuinely purposeful at the same time. 1 Peter 1:6-7. And centuries earlier, the prophet Habakkuk watched injustice all around him and asked God directly why he wasn't doing anything. And instead of an explanation, God tells him a rescue is coming too slowly for Habakkuk to see it play out yet. Habakkuk 2:3. Habakkuk's response, at the end of a short, honest book, is one of the rawest statements of trust in the Old Testament. Even if everything visible fails, he will still rejoice in God. Habakkuk 3:17-18. Not a man given an explanation, a man choosing to trust the pattern before he can see it. I want to bring this all the way back down to where you're actually living, because a verse like this is dangerous if it stays abstract. This does not mean your pain right now has an explanation you're owed today. It doesn't mean you have to find the silver lining before you're allowed to grieve. It doesn't mean the person who hurt you gets a pass because God will use it. What Joseph said to his brothers doesn't erase what they did. What happened to Jesus doesn't make the people responsible any less responsible. God working good out of something never requires you to call the something good. What Romans 8:28 actually offers, once you've seen it running through the whole story, is this. You are not the first person to stand inside something that looks like pure loss, with no way it could ever mean anything. Joseph didn't know for years that the pit and the prison were part of anything. The disciples watching the crucifixion had no framework yet for a resurrection 3 days later. In every case, the goodness was real, but it wasn't visible from inside the moment. That's not a formula that guarantees your specific situation will resolve on any particular schedule. It's a pattern held up across the whole of Scripture that says God has a track record of not being finished with the things that look finished to you. If you're in a season right now that feels like Joseph's pit or Job's ash heap or the 3 days between Friday and Sunday where nothing made sense yet, you're not outside the story. You're inside the part of it that always comes before anyone can see what God was doing. So here's what I'd ask you to do this week. Find one thing in your life right now that feels unredeemable. Not something small, the real one, the thing you'd rather not think about too directly. And instead of asking, why did this happen? Which is a question this verse was never designed to answer, ask a different one. Where is God asking me to trust the pattern even without seeing the shape of it yet? That's not a question you'll answer in one sitting. Joseph didn't answer it in one sitting either. It took him roughly 20 years from the pit to the palace to say the sentence in Genesis 50:20 out loud. You're allowed to still be in the part of the story where the answer hasn't arrived. Think back to that room in Rome, to a man dictating a letter he'd never live to see the full impact of, in a city that would kill him a few years later for the very faith he was defending in that sentence. Paul didn't write, "God works all things together for good," from a place of comfort. He wrote it on his way toward prison and eventually toward his own execution. He wasn't describing a theory. He was describing the only thing that had ever actually held up under the weight of his own life. If this connected something for you today, I want you to drop one word in the comments, even, as in, even this. You don't have to explain what this is. You don't have to have it figured out. Just that one word, a small act of trust that you're standing inside the same pattern Joseph stood inside, the same pattern Paul stood inside, even in the part where nothing makes sense yet. Don't forget to subscribe to Bible Peace for more scripture-based content. God bless you.